If you haven't filled out a yellow sheet yet, you can continue to do so even as we get into that process. We'll keep going until we run out. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And as Mr. Kramer has been stating, that there are yellow sheets in the back as you come in. If you would like to speak during public forum, please fill one of those out and bring it up to the stage and we will add it to our stack. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda? So moved. Thank you, Mr. Sussex. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Saucedo. Been moved and seconded to approve the agenda. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Are there any abstentions? Agenda's been approved. Item D, accept the resignation submitted by TMS Social Studies teacher Kia Zeeler, effective May 21st, 2021. Can I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Schmick. Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Any discussion? All those in favor of accepting the resignation submitted by TMS Social Studies teacher Kia Zeeler, effective May 21st, 2021, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions? The motion passes. Item E, public forum. We are meeting tonight to take public input on the combination of our wrestling programs, starting with Lingle, Fort Laramie, and Southeast for next year, with the possibility of all three in future years. There is a 5-minute time limit, and legal restrictions limit the amount of board comment and interaction during this portion of the meeting. So with that, I will invite Mr. Williams, Tim Williams, to come forward first. And as you come up to the podium, there is a button on the microphone. Please make sure that light's green so we can hear you.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to speak to you tonight. Just a little background on how we've gotten to where we're at. A couple years ago, Mike and I just started discussing the possibility of maybe co-oping in wrestling because our numbers had started to dip. And with COVID last year and the WHSAA's decision to go to a duals only format, that made our decision pretty easy. Neither one of us were going to be competitive in that dual format. And so we felt that was in the best interest of our kids. And really that any disagreement that we would have to combining with Torrington in the future would come from what we feel is best for our kids. We want all of our kids, including the THS kids, to have the opportunity to compete. There are limits in weight classes and how many kids you can have in weight classes and all that kind of stuff. We just simply do not want to see any of those opportunities to compete taken away. When we started talking about that, we were asked to ask our kids if they would continue to wrestle if we co-opt with Lingle, first of all, and then if we were to co-opt with Torrington, would they continue to wrestle? When we asked, I went on our bus one day, our kids were leaving for a meet, and everybody said that if we co-opt with Lingle, that they would go ahead and wrestle. If we were to co-opt with Torrington, there was 2 or 3 kids that said that they would not wrestle. And so when we got into that co-op, we weren't quite sure how it was going to go, but it went amazingly. The 4 coaches and every single kid on that team set their egos aside, and they did what was best for that team, and they very quickly became a team, and they were very successful. There was a lot of excitement. There was more excitement about wrestling in Southeast hallways this past year than there has been in a long, long time. And so that just told me everything I needed to know about the success that they were having. You know, one of the main reasons that was given for not wanting to wrestle if we came to town, last year we would wrestle in Lingle for a week, we would wrestle in Southeast for a week. And if we were to come in here, we would probably have to come in here every single day. And that is one of the main reasons that our kids give us for not participating in track. They think we come to town too much. We don't have a nice track out in Yoder, so we do come to town quite a bit, especially to jump and stuff like that. The kids don't like coming to town all that much because they get home. Well, by the time they get done practicing here, they get back to Yoder by 6:30. If you live in LaGrange, you're home by 7. And so it's just a long day, and then they really don't like that a whole lot. You know, and I know we all know this. Research will tell us that kids that participate are more likely to be academically successful and more likely to stay out of trouble. And so I just really want to reiterate, our goal is to have as many kids competing as we possibly can. And until we have to, or we're forced to combine into one team, I really don't see a point of doing that. It was very successful last year. Mike and I are aware that we're going to have to make some coaching decisions coming into this year because Mr. Kramer was kind enough last year to let us keep all 4 of the coaches because it was a late decision. But we know we're going to have to reduce that. And our coaches know that, and everybody's been really good about that. So we're prepared to make those decisions. And so we would just ask that we stay together until absolutely necessary, or that we would be forced to combine. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. And also as a reminder, there is no action item on this tonight. We're just taking public input, just so we're all clear on that. Okay. Mr. Mike Lashley.
Good evening, Board Chair Jesperson, Board of Trustees. Thank you for having us here. It's kind of weird following Tim because a lot of the same things that he said I was going to say. When he said that things went amazingly well between the 2 schools, that might have been the understatement of the evening. I think it started with the coaching staff that we had. There were no egos, it wasn't Lingle kids, Southeast kids. It was our kids. We kind of called it 2 schools, 1 family. And it truly was amazing to see the 2 communities come together and the support they had for each other. I know a lot of times people make a lot about the rivalry between Southeast and Lingle. And honestly, I think that's more between the adults than it is the kids, first of all. But in this situation, there was no rivalry. You know, one of the things I was concerned with going in was how is this going to work with coaches from a different school coaching other kids, and it was a non-issue. And in fact, one of the problems before the season really got going was what are we going to do with uniforms? Because, you know, how are we going to make this work? And it was actually the kids came up with the idea that when we practice in Lingle that week, when we go that weekend to a wrestling tournament, we're going to wear Lingle's uniforms. The next week, when we're practicing at Yoder all week, then we're going to wear the Cyclone uniforms. And that's exactly what they did throughout the course of the year. The parents did chip in, and we bought some brown and gold uniforms, brown, gold, and white. We thought that kind of represented the cowboy spirit. And so we shared those and went with those. It was a fantastic experience for our kids. When we visited with our athletes about who would be interested in wrestling with Torrington, we had 3 or 4 kids that said they would. The rest of them said, no, I would not have any interest. Now, if it came right down to it, how do we know? Maybe they all would. I mean, maybe none of them would. But based on our questioning of our current student athletes, that's the data that we've gotten. I'd like to echo what Mr. Williams said. You're all familiar with the research with kids participating in activities. Interscholastic activities are meant to subsidize the classroom academic learning experiences that these kids have. Athletics and all the activities that we have are learning experiences. And we know that if kids are going to have those experiences, they must be participating. So we need to make sure that we're doing everything in our power to encourage as many student athletes as possible to participate. And that is one of our concerns, is that if we do combine, then we're going to lose a lot of kids, maybe from all three communities, that are going to decide that they don't want to wrestle. And that's counterintuitive to what we're all here for, is to get kids to participate and help kids learn. I've seen this happen in other communities. It's been, I don't know, 8-10 years ago now, when Burns and Pine Bluff did a similar thing. And I don't know the exact numbers, but it was like they each had like 14 wrestlers in each community. And they thought, well, boy, wouldn't this be great? We put them all together and we have 28 wrestlers. That's a great program. We can be competitive. And lo and behold, 14 plus 14 ended up being like 16 because kids didn't come out. And I really don't want that to happen here. We would prefer to keep Wingo and Southeast wrestling together. It was a very positive experience for our communities and our kids. At this point, we do not have any interest in joining forces with Torrington. One of the things that I mean, it's kind of the elephant in the room. It needs to be addressed. If you're going to put everybody in one wrestling program, we need to talk about what coaches are going to be coaching at. Because honestly, I don't think it's fair that we just automatically, no offense to the Torrington coaches, but just automatically accept them as the coaches. Southeast and Lingle have guys that have been very successful. They've proven their worth with kids, and they've been coaching wrestling a long time. And I think every coach that wants to apply needs to be considered if we ever go in that direction. So thank you for your time. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Mr. Lashley. Mr. Plingle.
Again, good evening, everybody, and thanks for letting us talk about this subject. And I have a little bit different viewpoint on this as we look at everything. So one thing I want to emphasize, this has been kind of in my 5 years here, as it's about to end the month. I want to emphasize there's been great cooperation between the athletic directors at all three high schools and the administrators at all three high schools. I think as a board, you should be very proud of the true, honest collegialness of everybody working together. So this wrestling topic has been a little unusual as we talk about how we've been on different sides of this and everything. But I would emphasize that we really do have great communication amongst all three schools. I feel I could call, I know Mike and Tim have been fantastic to me in my 5 years here, but I know I could call either Mr. Epler, Mr. Gilchrist, and at any time we talk things out and work things out. So no matter what comes from this, I do think things are going to be worked out just fine for the benefit of all the kids. From the THS perspective, we would welcome combining all three programs. We believe that would make it absolutely fantastic wrestling room and a true competitive program. There doesn't seem to be any problems when we combine in any other sports or activities or at THS. There's many activities and sports that we do, not a problem. A couple of things about whoever the THS AD, if it was still me, then I'm responsible for those combo programs. I'm the one that has to answer to them. I'm the one that evaluates the coaches. I'm the one that has to handle all the budgets. I'm the one that supervises all the events. That comes on me. The THS AD is responsible for hiring all the coaches along with in conjunction with the principal and in conversation with the superintendent. That's my responsibility. And it'll be Mr. Bartlett's responsibility after that. Because when it's done, no one else has any say in it. I'm the one that gets called about it on any combo agreement. Again, I believe this will be a great opportunity for all the wrestlers because it'll get settled. The kids will compete. Honestly, I don't buy that they won't wrestle. There's no problem with the kid coming up here and playing soccer this season. We just went down and competed very well. We compete at the 4A level in tennis. There's only 3 3A schools. Our kids do just fine. It's not just Torrington kids. It's all 3 schools working together. Indoor track, you just had 2 state champions wearing Torrington uniform. Wasn't a problem, but one was a Southeast girl and one was a Lingle boy. I didn't see I have not seen in 5 years a kid from one of those two schools needing medical attention because they're wearing a Torrington uniform. The kids get along fine. This other stuff is just, to me, is manufactured stuff because they work together just fine. The kids support each other. You came to the last two track meets, Weissman and regionals. They're all rooting for each other. They all know each other. This, to me, could be very seamless. As far as coaching, I'd say if you combine them, open it up. Yeah, I'm pro Coach Grant. I hired him for the reasons I wanted him here. Same for Mr. Pekowski. I have nothing against Coach Gifford, nothing at all. I think you open it up and you combine. If they did it before I was here, then I'd be part of that hiring process. But if it's after me, then it would be the Torrington AD, Mr. Bartlett, along with Mr. Christensen. And that's how all the other coaches have been hired. So I don't know why you would do it any other way, because no one has had any. I've hired I've hired a head tennis coach every year. No one's asked a question about how that hiring process has been done. Any coach that I've hired has been within our building. Obviously, talking to Mr. Kramer and letting him know what's going on. But as the Torrington AD, I'm supposed to handle that. So I think, wrestling, I think there's a sense, I don't know this for a fact, but I think there's a concern that those kids can't compete at any higher level than a 2A level in wrestling. I think that's ridiculous. I believe in those Southeast and Lingo kids. I think they would wrestle just fine. I think they would raise their level and be just fine. And I think to say anything less to them is kind of a slap in their face. I think they would be able to compete very well. And I think we would have a very strong competitive 3A program in wrestling. So one thing as you consider this, and whenever you talk with any, whether it's a special session or your executive session, I also think you need to consider a bigger picture that could be possibly coming to this district. I think in the very near future, you're going to have to talk about football combining. When the numbers, if you truly want a freshman program where the freshmen can play at the freshman level and not be forced to play up at an older level, just have a JV program and then a very strong varsity where it's primarily the juniors and seniors playing that. The kids at all three schools have proven they can play very good football. So I'm not saying combine them right now, but I think that's needs to be on your site as you look further down the road. And the same thing in track. All three teams are competitive, but if they were all together, and if you're ever facing the budget cuts coming down the road, they'll be really good about that. So like I said, I don't want to see the negativity or people starting to point. I have viewed my time here of all three schools working really well together. And I think the kids, I've seen it. The kids get along just fine. And so if we really want to, have a very strong wrestling program, I think we could combine them and we could accommodate them just fine. We have the wrestling facility for it. We have the wrestling room for it. The coaches will get worked out. And if they all coach, I think, again, they'll do it. They'll work together to help the kids get better at wrestling. So that's where I'm at on that. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flindle. Up next, Mr. Doug Brammer.
Well, wow, guys. I'm Doug Brammer, not a public speaker. I'm a father of two young men that wrestle in Lingle and combined with the Southeast team last year. My father also coached wrestling in Lingle for, 32 years, quite a while. So I've been around the wrestling program in a small community literally my entire life. Following up Mr. Plendle's speech here about the combination of all three schools, I kind of had a change of opinion based off of what we just heard, actually. So I don't really have a prepared speech to come to you with after hearing that. But what does speak to me after hearing that is a giant sense of pride and small town, hometown feeling that you get with small schools like Lingle and Southeast when you talk about a central school big brothering or bullying a smaller school. Lingle has always been kind of a redheaded stepchild, to not come up with a better term, in this district. And it, from what I had just heard, I'm still kind of a little bit upset and shaken about it, actually. The greatest fear of putting the schools together that we had last year when we talked about this was what the next step was going to be. There were, at the Lingle only meeting that we had for the combination of Southeast and Lingle last year, the biggest concern was what's going to be next. That we're entering a slippery slope of losing our identities in our small communities by doing this. And from what I just heard, that is exactly what the plan seems to be. And there is no other way to look at that, in my opinion. Both of my boys wrestled in the Torrington Wrestling Club. Every one of those kids in the Torrington Wrestling Club, they're from Southeast, they're from Lingle, they're from Torrington, and there's a group of them up here that represent some best friends that all grew up in that club and wrestled, all from different schools. That's never really been the issue about them getting along or them being successful in what they do. These kids wrestle, like Mr. Plindell said, that these kids can compete with 4A schools. They compete with 3A schools when they wrestle in the USA program, and they compete really well. We have some really tough kids. The sport of wrestling is unique from golf or tennis or soccer, in as much as you are in a wrestling room getting pushed as hard as you possibly can by other good kids in the wrestling room. So the more kids you have in a wrestling room, the better you're going to be. That's just bottom line. I get that. Kind of losing my train of thought. I just got super nervous coming down here. Bottom line is I'm for the Southeast and Lingle wrestling together again next year. I think it was great what we did last year. The numbers were there to where you could put kids at similar weights in a wrestling situation in the practice room, and they made each other successful. But as far as combining with Torrington, my only concern about the combination would be the slippery slope of what is next if we were to combine. And it comes down to a question that I would pose is, what is the driving force behind this entire conversation? If it's budget, we can all see what's going to happen within the state. At some point, those decisions are going to have to be made. We get it. We can't be blind to that fact. But if we can hold on to what we have as these small communities as long as we can, then I think that that's what we need to do. I don't feel that combining with Torrington this year in wrestling is going to be something that we need to be discussing. If you're talking about creating opportunity for kids to wrestle, the opportunity for kids to wrestle in Torrington is already there. If you've got a coach, a wrestling mat, and 2 kids that want to wrestle for Torrington, the opportunity for them to wrestle is still there. You cannot confuse opportunity with success. If you're pushing this to create some kind of successful, quote unquote, successful program, there is no guarantee that that's going to happen either. The opportunity for these kids in very, very talented hands in Torrington with Grant Polkowski, great coaches, the opportunity for success is there for everybody in Torrington. What Lingle and Southeast put together last year, because of the times with the COVID and because there was some kind of writing on the wall, was a great thing. And I think we should keep it as it is.
Thank you.
So, sorry. Thank you.
Chris McNeese.
Good evening. I'm Coach McNeese over at Southeast, then junior high coach and assistant high school coach, and been working my tail off to get the junior high to compete pretty well. Got a number of kids that their goals are to be a state champion, and they work very hard to realize them goals. And I know I'm kind of fighting for my job too, but I've been told by a number of athletes that they wouldn't compete without me as a coach for them, because they want their dreams accomplished, and I want their dreams accomplished as well. So and just has been told by a number of kids they wouldn't wrestle for Torrington without me. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Cody Grant.
All right, thanks for the opportunity for me to come up here and speak tonight. Cody Grant. I just wanted to basically touch on 2 points on this conversation. I respect a lot of what was said previous to me. You know, everyone has their own concerns and, you know, both positives and negatives, and I can see them from both sides. But I just want to, I think what's getting lost in this, and I think it's kind of the opposite of what's being said, is the competitiveness. I've been part of a 30-person team. Okay, we would go to a varsity tournament and a JV tournament. We would win both tournaments some season, or, you know, weeks. I mean, that's how competitive we were. And the reason is because you have a competitive room. Having a competitive room can be the difference of a guy not placing at state being elevated to a state placer, being a state placer being elevated to a state champion. All right. I've seen it. I've seen it on our team. When I was a sophomore, we qualified 9 guys to the state championship that year, and multiple 3rd and 4th place finishes. You know, we won a state championship as a team. I would say there's a good handful of those guys that they probably would not have ever been in a state championship if it wasn't for the competitiveness of our room. Okay. And I think that's best for the kids, because a lot of kids are, you know, if they don't want to go competing even at the next level, you know, what better way to do it than having a competitive room? I think that's big. That's when this conversation, just looking from an outsider, I just want to drive that point home, is just, I think it really would benefit everyone in the long run, the kids, the wrestlers. I think everyone would get better, and I believe they would, you know, be able to reach levels of success that they might not reach at a lower, if we didn't combine or had a tough room. And then on top of that, I just want to say, I understand what they're saying. And I talked to Coach Gifford years ago. I wasn't even coaching at the time. He was, I think I was refereeing or something. And I ran into him and, you know, was kind of asking him how his season was going. And he's like, yeah, you know, it's tough going to a duel with 7 guys. I found that out last year. We had 10 guys, a lot of duels. So our numbers are down. And I don't know if they're going to go up anytime real soon. So I mean, I want our guys to be able to not only experience that individual success, but I want to be a part of a winning team. I was part of winning teams. It's awesome. Okay. A lot of people will say, oh, wrestling's an individual sport. That's not true. It's an individual and it's a team sport. Okay. When we'd go to duels and you're having to forfeit 4 or 5 of the weights, we're not going to win a duel. So, you know, when they had talked about it helped them, you know, competitive, we're looking at the same thing. And I also know, looking at it, I know there's great wrestlers in every room right now, in Southeast, Lingle combined, and there's great wrestlers coming up from each program. You know, now with 3 or 4 wrestlers, you're gonna have a good team. 3 or 4 wrestlers from every school, you're gonna be competing for state championships. And I'm talking about within the next 5 years. I've seen the guys that are coming up from all the programs, okay? And those are my 2 biggest points, just the competitiveness, and I want everyone to be able to experience what it's like to be on a winning team and not have to go into a duel giving up 30 points before we even step on the mat. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So just at this point, as we're considering this and hearing this public comment, I am just curious from the ADs, maybe you can tell us, how many wrestlers are there in each program currently? Or were there this prior season? I'm just unaware.
Torrington had 10 go to region. Southeast Lane together had 18, where we anticipated about 20 to 22.
20 to 22, and then there was 10 total in Torrington.
Did you say go to regionals, or how many did you have on your squad?
We took everyone. We had guys that were either quit or, you know what I mean, but by the end of the season, we had 10 guys. We took the ball and yards.
Thank you.
I have one, just a question, I guess, on the same topic. Would all 3 schools think kind of the same way? Do all 3 schools have low numbers currently? Torrington has 10, Southeast had 8 or 9, Lingle had about that, so everybody's about equal.
Talking about the numbers, these last 2 years, we've been lower. The first 3 years I was here, we were in the high 20s, low 30s, just for THS. We had a really big senior class 3 years ago that had over 10 senior wrestlers. That's kind of a gap that lowered us. We would anticipate 18 to 22 wrestlers next year, based on talking to the middle school, TMS, kids in our building.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Doyle Meyer.
Thank you, board. Thank you, administrators and parents for allowing me the opportunity to speak here. For me, this is kind of a personal issue. I've been dealing with this for about 17 years, where I've been the head coach of the Torrington Wrestling Program. This was brought to the administrators of Southeast and Lingle about a decade ago about combining all 3 programs. And thank you guys for hearing me out at that time when I did ask. 3 years ago at a DAC meeting, it was brought up again about combining all 3. And I think this is about the kids. This is about doing what's best for Goshen County wrestling. It's an opportunity I think the board needs to grab and go ahead and beat for the budget near falls that are going to happen here in the near future. If you combine the programs now, you're going to be way ahead. Burns, Pine Bluffs did combine, and at the first year or 2, their numbers were down, but now they're getting to be a powerhouse. So that's a positive thing that Burns, Pine Bluffs has now. And back in the DACA meeting and 4 years ago, there was a plan. I had the plan, and I'm willing to share that plan about you got to keep the integrity of Goshen County wrestling. So if you're going to combine this, you got to make sure that you keep the Dogger Invitation. You got to make sure you keep the Southeast Duels, you keep the Blazer Wrestling, and you keep it within Goshen County. Invite the same teams here. Gives you a lot more home events. I think also it's going to save you a little bit of money. I don't think much, but it'll save you a little bit of money combining them. And I also believe that it would bring wrestlers to the program. They start out in the wrestling room, and there's 80, and Mr. Polkowski can attest to this. There's 80 wrestlers in there from all around the county. Why not keep that within the county? Okay, but don't make it Torrington wrestling, make it Goshen County wrestling. I did a little preliminary data. combining the state placings of Southeast, Lingle, and Torrington, put them together. And over the last 20 years, if you had combined the programs when it was first brought, you'd have 4 state championship titles. You'd have taken second twice. You'd have taken third 6 times. I think the competitiveness of all 3 schools would just make it a better program overall. And then it's about the wrestlers. It's not about Lingo, Southeast, or Torrington. It's about the wrestlers and making Goshen County wrestling the best that it can be. If you combined all 3 schools, you'd still be 3A. If you combine the ADM of all 3 schools, you'd be at 506 this current year. And there are still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 schools above us, ADM in class 3A. So it'd still be considered kind of a small school in 3A. If it is, you guys so choose to do combine all 3 schools together, it probably does need to be practicing at Torrington High School, and the coaching, head coach needs to be opened up and be applied for. I think that it has to go through Torrington, of course, because of the practice facilities, but there's nothing to be said that we can't do home events, home duels in Torrington or in Southeast at Lingle or in Torrington, and there'll be events there already. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I think this is, combining all 3 would be best for Goshen County. Thank you.
Thank you. D. Brammer.
I'm D. Brammer, lived in this county my whole life. Coached wrestling here for 31 years. Lingle, Torrington, Southeast, been there, done that, got the t-shirt and the hat. Wrestling is a special sport. We're all family here. We cheer for each other's kids. We know them. We've watched them since they were this big. I don't think that you can compare, as the AD from Torrington, I'm sorry, I've been out a while. I don't remember his name, but Lingle and Southeast never had a tennis team before. We never had our own soccer team before. We never had our own cross-country teams. But we have huge tradition in wrestling in these 2 schools. We've had our own state champions. We've had our own coaches that have done very well. And I'll tell you right off right now, I think we all 3 should go together. And that's coming from a guy who bleeds the red, white, and blue. And our neighbors to the south used to be big rivals. But I tell you what, I was all for putting them together. And when I saw those kids with my own grandsons on the team, it was eye-opening for an old dogger like me. It was a great thing. You cannot show me another program in this state or anywhere around, I believe, that finished the year with more kids than they started with. Kids joined the team after they saw and wanted to be a part of it. One thing I will say though, and I agree with Doyle, we have our own traditions at our schools, and that may not seem like a whole lot now, but we have our pride. And I would love to see all 3 teams go together But the big elephant in the room is, who do we compete as? Can we be Goshen County Schools? It's up to you to figure out how that's done. Who's going to hire the coaches? I trust in the ADs in this county. They hire the best people that they can possibly get. There should be no, oh, we got to have a guy from here and we got to have a guy from there and a guy from here. Hire the best person you can get. And as far as competing in the 3A, you have 3 All-Americans that didn't wrestle in 3A or 4A or anywhere from Wyoming sitting right up here in your audience. They went to Iowa, they went all over the country. They're not scared of competing in 3A. Bring them. And being a coach for 31 years in this county, I will say, and I agree with, and every coach in this place will agree with me, you get better in the practice room. You cannot get better with nobody to practice with. The better people you have in the practice room, the better you're going to be. And the more you can get there in that practice room and the higher quality that they are, the better it's going to be. They will be competitive, no matter what weight class they're in. I don't know what to tell you. It's your decision. But please don't make decisions based on something that you don't know or that you may think. I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing we go together. And coming from me, that's a huge statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Christensen.
Good evening, how we doing? Kind of wish we could have had this weather yesterday when we got together. Would have been slightly different and a little bit better, I think, but I want to say thanks to Mr. Meyer. I think he spoke well. The ADs all presented some great information right now. And Mr. Brammer, I certainly appreciate your experience in the county and everything that you got to say about these programs. I'm not going to speak a whole lot to wrestling for a few reasons. Top of the list is that I don't know a whole lot about wrestling. And I do know quite a bit about the finances at Torrington High School and within the district. We have been handed a gift from the federal government in not having to, or rather, having this decision to make right now. Because barring CARES money flowing into this district like water out the tap, I don't think we're even talking. This decision would have been made. That being said, I've got a $150,000 budget to work with in educating the students in this building and running the activities and the athletics programs that happen inside this building as well. That is getting to the point because of inflation and because of budget cuts that it's becoming a difficult thing to do. I spent all day today working to form next year's budget. I can't fund the activities and the athletics that I've got. It's to a point that we need fundraising. We need to be looking to other avenues to get to that point. Now, I've heard the pride of these programs for our students. It's best for them to participate in activities and athletics. For every single one of them to participate in activities and athletics. We will have more students out if we've got a competitive program. As Mr. Williams and Mr. Lashley spoke to, as Mr. Brammer spoke to, they ended the season with more students than they had, right? Those students that came out later saw a few things. They saw coaches that cared for them. They saw great wrestling coaches that put together a good program. They wanted to compete for that. They also saw that after maybe a couple meets, wow, my classmates are doing pretty well. And it gave them the reason and the impetus to go and work as hard as I know from watching practices that Mr. Meyer has run in the past and Mr. Grant has run here. Those guys work hard. And I believe that if we have a championship caliber program, which we will, we'll have more students out, which is going to impact the academics that happen in Southeast, in Lingle, and at THS. We're going to rebuild some of the pride that exists in these communities. Because what I do know about wrestling is over the course of the past 3 years, when I go to a wrestling duel or a wrestling meet, and I get to watch the other team send a guy to the table to shake the ref's hand and give him 6 points, that's not fun. And it's not fun walking into the gym knowing that we're going to lose because we're giving up more points than we can possibly earn to open spots. We need competitive athletics here. We need to be able to fund our athletics here. In order to do that, we need to combine. And I don't think the agenda item or the conversation should be about combining Lingle and Southeast next year and possibly with Torrington later. We should be combining all three right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Dennis Estes.
Thank you, Board. My name is Dennis Estes. I've lived in Goshen County all my life. I've coached wrestling in this community since about 1981. I've been involved with the program, freestyle. I've been involved with the middle school. I currently coach the middle school assistant coach here in Torrington. I can tell you what Mr. Grant told you. I brought those kids up through there with some great help from a lot of fathers and a lot of mothers to put those programs together. It brought our community together. We had a group of parents that stuck together. I can tell you now, the freestyle program's the same way. I call it freestyle, it's not freestyle anymore, but those parents will come together. Those kids will leave Lingle's room, they'll leave Southeast room, and they'll come to Torrington Wrestling Freestyle, all together. We had great freestyle teams, we had great middle school teams, all the way through the district. Those kids will compete. If you put them in the same room, they're gonna get better. We had kids compete hard, and we had kids come out left and right after we got successful. That's why Star Valley's successful. That's why they have first and second places in one weight. Those guys know, and they get competitive in those rooms. And I think you're just putting it off. I mean, you're gonna have to combine. There's no way around it. The budget is what the budget is. I work a city budget every day. Our budget's as slim as yours. And we are cutting everything we can cut just to make ends meet. And I'm glad you guys are willing to listen to the people who are involved with these programs. And I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Estes.
Thank you. I appreciate your time. I guess I'd like to reiterate a couple things that a lot of people have said here tonight, and that is that wrestling is a unique community. I wrestled with Coach Grant from the time I was age 4, every day. He made me a better person. I hope that he says the same thing about me. People that are wrestlers, even as children, as they're adults, they still self-identify as wrestlers. It's that important. It's that defining of a characteristic. That being said, we have such a strong wrestling history in this community that when you meet other wrestlers, that's what you talk about. And this discussion that we're having now in the wrestling community of Goshen County is seen as a resignation. We're resigning to the fact that wrestling is dying. And that's a hard pill for all of us to swallow. Now, I will also agree with a lot of people that say that success is made in the room. It's who you wrestle every day that push you and make you a better person on the mat and off the mat. So while I do think that during these times of low numbers, it's important to combine and get all of our kids together so that they can push each other and grow, I hope that this is not the ultimate long-term solution. We cannot look at this as the only solution. At some point, we have to start thinking about recruitment. And honestly, I think that probably comes to the AD's responsibility, unfortunately. I hate to put responsibility on people, but we have to start looking long-term and what's going to be best for my kids who are elementary students in Lingle. Because we have the opportunity to grow this program. Instead of talking about combining them, let's start talking about, we need to split these groups back up because they don't all fit in the room anymore. Let's start talking about starting a women's wrestling club. It's getting more and more popular. So I hope that we can move from making a short-term decision about this to better the wrestling in Goshen County, to looking for ways that we can become a powerhouse again in all three schools. The other thing I'd like to say is that I'm nervous about the idea of selecting a new coach. I think as me as an outsider looking in, I think it would be incredibly difficult to make everybody happy. One school is going to see one coach as not their coach. And I think it's going to be really hard for a coach coming in to make everybody happy. So, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Michelle Baker.
Good evening. I know that we've heard a lot about we need to combine these programs, and I totally understand. But I have 5 sons, and 3 of them, well, actually all 5 of them are wrestlers, but 3 of them would die for her husband. Why? Because they have that relationship. They are football players, they are wrestlers, and they have grown up since junior high wrestling for that man right there. And each one of them would drive 1,000 miles to help Coach McNeese, because that's the guy who's been consistent in their program. That's the guy that they know is there and is just as happy and joyous. I have pictures of him jumping up when Will got second and just as joyous as Will was. And just as consoling this year after a COVID year and not being able to wrestle very much, because my boy is Big Will Baker. He's 285 pounds. And so he went into the wrestling championships and he made a stupid mistake. And the man that he was wrestling was actually slotted. He was slotted for first, and the other gentleman was a senior, and he was slotted for second. And he shook Will's hand and said, "Thank you for the graduation present," because it was one stupid error. And that is the relationship that we all talk about in wrestling. It's having that coach that you will die for, that can bring you off that ledge when you made that one stupid error. And instead of getting the first that you were slotted for, you walk away with third, but you need to walk away with dignity. And her husband and Mr. McNeese are both of those men for my boys, because they've coached them since the 6th grade. And that is a relationship, and that is a bond, and that is something we cannot break. Because as much as the combination is great to save money, there was a lot of prickly pear moments with Mr. Gifford, and nothing personal, but my boy likes to eat. And Mr. Gifford is like, I got to get home. There's a storm. My boy eats. He's 6'8" and he's 285 pounds, and he has been all day wrestling, or he's been all day bored to death. He wants to eat. So there is that time to congeal. And we did that last year. And I can see we can build having Lingle and Southeast together this year and continue that bond and get Mr. Gifford into the situation where everybody is building. But you cannot take high school wrestlers and say, here's your coach, you don't know who he is, you don't trust him, but you need to die for him. You need to trust him when he says, do this move. You need to do it no matter what. That takes years of trust. That takes years of growth with that man. And I don't see combining under a brand new coach for my son's senior year where he is slotted again to go to first. Yes, I want the competition. Don't get me wrong. But the coaches may be the expense this year in keeping them all, because you cannot take a high school wrestler who's slotted to be first in the state and say, oh, by the way, we're changing all your coaches. Good luck. Because you can't build that bond in 20 minutes. You can't build that bond in one season. It's a bond that is taken since the 6th grade. And that bond her husband has, because I've watched my kids crawl underneath 300-pound guys because Bullington said, get the quarterback. And my little 185-pound Brian would crawl underneath that with the barriers on his ribs to make sure he didn't get them broken, and he got the quarterback, and he helped them get further. Big Will Baker made a deal with her husband saying, if you play football for me, we will have a wrestling program at Southeast. And he held him to it. And driving back and forth is not fun. I know you all think, well, gee, it's just Southeast, it's just 15 miles. Well, my oldest son played soccer, and he was half an hour every day late to practice, and half an hour early to leave practice. The other guys would still be playing a scrimmage. He wouldn't get to play it because he needed to get back on the bus so he could go all the way back out to Hawk Springs. And he'd get home at 7:30 trying to do homework. The bus is not your friend, especially to a student who might be on the edge, who may not be that straight A sports student. My son David had a learning problem. So he needed extra help with his homework. He needed extra time. But when the bus comes and gets you at 6:30 in the morning, you don't have a lot of time when you didn't get home till 7:30. We have wrestlers in the Grange. And those boys that were going, boy, did they complain. They were not thrilled about, gee, putting another half an hour in a bus. But you know why they did it? Because of those coaches. They die for those coaches. So when you're thinking about combining the program, it's no big deal. Just put them on a bus, bring them into town. Think about those C students who are just trying to stay in sports. Those kids who need time to do their homework, who are working hard to stay on that team. And that half an hour bus ride can be the difference in whether or not they get to stay or not. And I will tell you, if Will Baker does not have Christmas Niece as a coach, he will not do as well. Because there's been times when Will didn't have anybody to wrestle, and he's come home and said, I almost pinned McNeese. And he was so proud. But he says at that last moment, he pulled one of those moves and he got me. So realize when you're talking about combining teams, you're affecting people's lives. You're affecting students who may not be straight A students. Now Will is, he's smarter than everybody, especially now that he's 18. But he needs that consistency. He needs that coach that he knows will die for him too.
Okay, thank you. That was our last one that's up here. Are there any other yellow slips out there? Somebody who didn't get a chance to bring it up? Or anybody who wants to talk? Okay, seeing none, I appreciate everybody's participation tonight. Thank you for coming out and giving us some good information to think about. And with that, I will adjourn the meeting.